You're not a psychic, are you? But you do something related for your job.
I do. First of all, let me just say that I was previously a clinical psychologist, and then started to entertain using psychology and sort of mind trickery and things like that. So I find it quite disturbing that people would go in their time of grief to someone who's not qualified in bereavement counselling and who could potentially move them forward past their grief and back into normality, if you will.
Although I guess if it works, if it's successful, and if it makes them feel better, is that any matter?
A good point. We do have a definite road towards recovery through bereavement and counselling. Psychics don't necessarily, they're not regulated. They can't necessarily give people the support they need. And in that chance, you're rolling a dice. If you roll the dice, you might get a psychic that gives you a great reading. Everything hits. You move forward through your bereavement, and that's a stage that most people would go through their bereavement counselling. But you're doing so at a risk. It might not work. Whereas if you went to see a specialist, you might well end up on the road to recovery a lot sooner.
I'm not saying you will judge anybody on this, but Tom, our text that we read out earlier on, was saying that he believes people who think that these are genuine without any evidence are being naive. Do you think it is naivety, or do you think there is just a wish and a will from all of us to just discover the things we don't know? And in a sense, you don't know any better than me or anybody else whether these people could potentially have the skills they say, because you can't prove a negative.
Well, that's correct. Essentially, I wouldn't call people naive. We all have a want to believe in something. We all have this urge to understand the world around us much better than we do. And for some people, that could be a quick answer. It could be that they go and believe in the psychic realm, and that answers all of their questions. Or if you're sort of more analytical or scientifically minded, it's that we don't have all of the answers, but we try to understand the world with experience. As far as sort of my belief in psychics and whether I know they exist or not, I personally don't. I've never had any evidence that the psychic exist in the sense that they're communicating with any sort of afterlife. I know all the tricks that psychics use. I know the different types of phrases, the generalizations, the cold readings, and all of these things, because I use them in my own job. But as an
and cold readings are very interesting. For those who don't know, just explain briefly cold readings. And I've seen this in action, and it's actually remarkable when you see people do these cold readings. I
mean, Simon, this is a huge, massive sort of discussion. I could talk for hours about sort of cold reading and the techniques. Essentially, cold reading is a way to use either statistical analysis, people's age, how they look, roughly what their profession might be based on their physical appearance, things like that, mixed in with Barnum statements, with statements that refer to everyone. Most of us probably have a scar on our left knee, or we've all had a generalized experience, because as diverse as we all are in the world, we have common problems, common ailments, we interact with things in the same way, but we all like to think of ourselves as very individual people, and we are to an extent, but in those generalities, psychics can exploit those, can make them seem like they're telling you things about you specifically that actually are more broad sweeping than we might recognize.
But then when we move away from cold reading, I mean, one of the best cold readings I ever saw was a guy on television who was trying to prove the world of the psychic to be fake, who was telling people, you've got a great sense of humor and you take life in your stride. I don't think you suffer fools gladly. I think you've had a lot of pain in your life. It's actually pain and it was going on and on. So we all said, yes, this is us, and of course everybody there. But then there's a big leap from that general and very generic advice and thoughts to very specific. And if somebody says you had the loss of a husband 10 years ago and he's watching over you now and he's with me, do they just strike lucky when that happens, or what?
I mean, it's very difficult to analyze a situation that's not only hypothetical, but where we can't have the full information. And a lot of the time we don't have the information when we hear from someone who's had a very successful reading. What we do know is there have been studies. One that springs to mind is one conducted by James Randi. And James Randi had someone have a reading in private, and they said to the person having the reading, how accurate do you think that was? And they said, 95%. He got my mother's name, he got that she'd been dead for 11 years, and listed all of these great hits. But what was also happening is that the reading was being transcribed, and the transcription of that reading actually showed that the psychic was wrong more often than right, was fishing for information, was trying to get names. Is that an F? Is that a P name? What kind of sound is that? And then the person tells the information, forgets they've told them the information, and the psychic then feeds it back to them as a hit, as a working idea that apparently has come from them and not from the person themselves. And looking at the transcripts, the guy's face was ashen, because he genuinely believed that all of these things were direct hits, that the psychic had not waffled, he had not probed for information. It's because our brains are the way that they are. We remember things that are relevant to us, and especially if we go to a psychic in a vulnerable state, if we're bereaved or we're looking for answers, we tend to dismiss the things that the psychic says that simply don't hit, don't have any relevance to us, and the things that do hit and do mean things to us, we latch onto them, and then you end up with someone walking away from that reading and saying, do you know what? That guy, he told me my mother's maiden name, he told me there was a ring behind a cabinet, and all of these types of things that potentially, I know we can't argue the case unless we have a transcript of the reading, but potentially, from what the studies show, it could just be sheer luck, generalization, feeding back information people have already have.
And Paul, just lastly on this, I mean, because of the views you hold, it's worthwhile just exploring a tiny bit more, just briefly, in terms of if you have any spirituality in your life at all. I mean, do you sense that we are spiritual beings, but those who harness this amongst the world of the psychic take spirituality many steps too far?
I personally am not a spiritual person. I have been in my past. But I think personally that the fact that I believe there is no afterlife, because we've never been presented with evidence, and it's always on the people bringing the evidence, the people that say there is an afterlife to provide the proof, the burden of proof is on them. But I think there's something very freeing about thinking there isn't an afterlife, because we have to live the life we have now to the fullest extent.